Well, welcome everybody to the next in our series, Naturally Speaking. This is Conservation of the Smaller Majority Butterflies of San Diego County with Paige Howorth. Before we get started, we've got just a few housekeeping items. Now, some of these items are out of date because we had some technical difficulties. We're in a meeting rather than a webinar format today. So what you're going to do is keep yourself muted at all times. And then if you have questions, you can queue those up in the chat and Paige will stop periodically to answer those questions. All right, I will ask those questions for you. If, of course, you can't type or don't wish to type, you're welcome at the end of this seminar to use the little raise hand function. And you can ask you to unmute your mic at that time and you can ask your question verbally. All right. Okay, so captions should be available. We're still figuring that out since we had to switch formats for tonight's talk, thanks to Idella, our live captioner, and sponsorship from the Cabrillo National Monument Foundation. So fairly shortly, there should be a little CC that shows up on your screen, and I think someone is not muted. If you could please mute yourself. You'll click on that to get your caption. Thank you very much for muting, Emily. All right, so this has been sponsored by the Cabrillo National Monument Foundation. Thank you so much, CNMF, for sponsoring this whole event. And now that we're done with all this housekeeping stuff, we're gonna get to the interesting part. It's my great pleasure to introduce tonight's guest speaker, Paige Howorth. Paige is the McKinney Family Curator of Invertebrates and leads the Entomology Department and Invertebrate Conservation Programs at the San Diego Zoo Wildlife Alliance. She is also a mom, a metalsmith, and in her words, these are hers, not mine, a fairly sketchy roller skater. So without further ado, I'm going to give you Paige Howorth. Paige, take it away.
Hey, everybody. So just because everything's hard today, the sun is going to be fully in my face during this entire presentation. So
of course,
going for us.
All right, Paige, let me start this recording. Perfect. Thank you. Go for it.
All right. Okay, so can everyone see my screen? And yes, we're good, because I have a weird thing on my screen, but again, we're making it work version. Okay, so thank you, Sam, for that introduction. I'm really happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to share this work. And we are going to talk a lot about butterflies today, and a little bit about our new experience that's replacing the former children's zoo at the San Diego Zoo. And I'm going to try to kind of tie those two things together. So if I could pick a picture that encapsulates what we do in the entomology department at the San Diego Zoo, this is it. And there's a lot in here if you look for it. So we've got this kid who is really into this New Guinea stick insect. He's having the time of his life. And then we have a couple people in the background doing this. And this is a classic nonverbal freak out behavior, which is like, I need to protect myself. I need to cover my neck. I need to close these blinds because it's not working. Excuse me 1 minute. Okay, sorry about that. So, you know, if you unpack this whole thing, it's kind of an opportunity. There's a lot of opportunity to reach people and to help them understand how important invertebrates are, particularly arthropods, which is kind of the majority of what we work with here at the San Diego Zoo. And also to really, tap into that sense of wonder that kids really have for insects and other invertebrates. And so we do that typically through our public engagement with animals in the form of like our experiences at our parks. But we also do outreach and education. We have a lot of summer camp kids, a lot of really great girls in science programs that we help, little artists, and a lot of great programs coming through our education departments that are involve invertebrates and insects and kids getting a real experience with them. And we also participate in invertebrate conservation. So primarily we do this through ex situ breeding of threatened species, not monarchs, but some lesser known species, and I really want to focus on those today. So this is the Quino checkerspot butterfly. We call it the boom and bust butterfly because it has these really interesting, we call them occurrences, but they're these populations that mingle with one another into a greater metapopulation. And so some years there's tons of butterflies, some years there's hardly any. And we're going to talk about like why their life history is so interesting. But this is a San Diego native and obviously a really beautiful little butterfly. So they were federally listed in 1997, but they used to be everywhere. This was, this is a map of kind of like past occurrences of Quino checkerspots. And, you can see that there's a Riverside population and a San Diego population. And these populations are becoming more and more fragmented, primarily through development. So a lot of freeways and residential developments have run right through their habitat. And this is just a list of our partners on this project. I love this picture of Allison Anderson from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service because this was the year that there were enough butterflies for us to collect to start our conservation project, so to start this breeding program. And this is representative of what happens after you haven't seen Quino very much for the last 5 years. There's been a drought. Even if you're on crutches, you get your butterfly net and you get out there. So the work is taking place at the Butterfly Conservation Lab, which is at the San Diego Zoo. And we actually became partners with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on this project in 2013, and we had to wait 3 years before there were enough butterflies to feel comfortable collecting some to start our program. And the program involves rearing larvae for release on the San Diego National Wildlife Refuge. And for most people, that sounds pretty straightforward. It's what we think of with butterflies. They lay their eggs, there's a caterpillar, the caterpillar eats and eats and eats, it becomes a chrysalis, and then the butterfly emerges and flies away. And that happens, it just doesn't happen that fast for Quino. So we're going to talk a little bit, and this is the same species, it's just an older larva. So we're going to talk a little bit about how that works. So this is just a schematic of what's happening. In the spring, there's adult butterflies, they lay eggs, they hatch into larvae, just like we said, and then they feed until their host plant senesces in the summer. So all the host plant, which is Plantago erecta, dwarf plantain, it all dries up and they basically shut down and they don't emerge again until it starts to rain, which, as we all know, is a mixed bag in Southern California. So sometimes it rains a little, sometimes it doesn't rain enough at all. Sometimes the rain is sporadic and it doesn't give enough time for larvae to develop, for example. And so these larvae will wake up on the other side of this, what's called diapause, and they feed and feed and feed and become adults, but sometimes they feed and feed and feed and they go back into diapause. So it's this, varied strategy to kind of beat this unpredictable climate that we have. And here's another way of looking at it. We used to think that this top tile always happened. So we used to think that this period of diapause always had to happen. And then, you have your egg, you have your tiny larva, they go to sleep, they wake up. And the post-diapause larva is the larva that wakes up. It either becomes adult and lays eggs and starts the whole process over again, or it goes back into diapause. But because of the work that we've been doing, we now know that the larvae don't even have to wake up and feed. So they can just remain tiny 4 to 6 millimeter caterpillars in their habitat for up to 2 years. And then we also found out in 2020, or we confirmed that they can go all the way through in one fell swoop. And I'm going to talk a little bit about each one of those. So in 2016, as I said, this was kind of our opportunity to do this for the first time. And we started to think about it from the caterpillar's point of view, obviously. We knew that they had all these adaptations and strategies to deal with unpredictable resources. We also knew that they were going to be, even though the Butterfly Conservation Lab is is built to be as outdoor as possible. You know, we have UV transmissive skylights, we have tons of windows and big sliding glass doors, and we have the ability to take them completely outside, you know, for hours at a time. But, you know, it's still a different environment than what they would be living in at the San Diego National Wildlife Refuge. So we also knew from the work that we've done between 2013 and 2016, and also the work that others have done, that you can artificially break diapause. So you can put those diapausing caterpillars into something and increase their humidity and give them host plant, and they're going to wake up and start feeding. But if you do that, what you're telling them is that it's raining and there's abundant host plant, and that may not be the best thing, and that may not be what's happening out in the field when you want to release them. So in order to get the timing right, we had to really think critically about, you know, the best way to give them the inputs that they need to do the things that Quino checkerspots do in the wild. So I like this image because it really shows the level of detection that we're talking about here. You know, this is a butterfly's antenna. They are receiving signals at this level. We need to think about that too. So this was our solution. And I'm just going to point out here that, like, this piece in the back is a bunch of straw looking things with shop towels stuffed in it. This is kind of representative of one other big thing that we do in the entomology department, which is tinker. So we have a lot of, you know, species that people haven't worked with yet. We have a lot of goals, and sometimes we have to MacGyver things and create things and use, you know, components that are intended for one thing and modify it into another thing. So it's kind of a, you know, a big sort of project for us to come up with, you know, the best release pod or the best thing for the larva to live in. And you'll see more of that as I go along. But what we decided on for Quino for the release was finch feeders. So we painted these chaparral brown so that they would, you know, really disappear into the habitat. And then we took these peat pots and poked holes in them that are big enough for the larvae to escape from, as well as the holes that are, you know, that are provided in the mesh feeder are large enough for these tiny caterpillars to crawl out of. And that way we put them in the habitat when we get past a certain point after they've gone into diapause, so that they can start really getting all those signals. And so here we are getting ready to load these pods up. This is Esther Chang. She's one of the primary contributors to this project on our team. She's really done a fantastic job on this project and others. This is, you can see the scale of what we're dealing with. So they're, again, really tiny larvae. They web up together communally, and they are just shut down. So we put them in their little shelters, which we now make into little bugles, inside the pods, close them up, and get ready to release them. And I think that this photograph really underscores how crazy and scary it was that first year that we were going to put these little tiny caterpillars out into a landscape that looked like this. And up until that point, it had been drought for years, and we didn't know what was going to happen. And we started learning, you know, I don't know how long it was, maybe within a week or 2 weeks, that it was going to rain. And then it was like, it's really going to rain. And so we put these little rain jackets on them because we were afraid that they were going to drown. That's how much rain we were expecting. And I don't know if anybody remembers that year. It was amazing, but man, it rained. And this picture is so cool because you can see the pod and you can see the plantago coming up right next to it, which is not an accident. We do a lot of, you know, vegetation mapping. But it was just such a hopeful moment and so exciting that, you know, okay, it's going to rain. We're going to have host plant. Now what's going to happen? And this graph kind of shows what happens. So this is like peak larvae, you know, 200-ish that we observed on the release site. And this is peak adults, so 35 adults, which is this. So if you spend your whole life looking for a unicorn and you see only one unicorn in like 6 years, and then you go somewhere and see 35 unicorns in one day, you know, it's like a life-changing experience. And so this team was really, really excited about these results. So we've continued to monitor during that year. And this is Dan Marshallek here on the left, formerly of SDSU, has worked on Quino and Hermes copper butterfly for a long time. So we were doing weekly monitoring, looking for larvae after the release, adult counts, obviously, later on in the season, you know, mapping out the host plant, making sure that we understood where it was, at least in that season. And then on the other end of the season, so after the host plant had all senesced and, you know, it was over, then we can go back into the pods, which is great because we can find out what happened to those guys. And we found a lot of things. And I promise this is not a BioQuip product placement, although they're great. But we just didn't have calipers that day. So we thought we would measure the letters on the BioQuip forceps. But anyway, you know, we had larvae at various stages. Sometimes we would find larvae that were like not our larvae, way too big, living in pods. We also found friends that weren't invited, and lots of predators, frankly, but living, coexisting with the Quino inside of the rounds like this. So we're not sure if there's something about the diaposing larvae that makes them less attractive to predators. And so 2017 was a crazy bonanza year. We had 5,000 larvae. We had to find 3 new sites to release them on. But what's interesting about this year is these blue dots represent rainfall. And so in this year, you know, there were like 3 distinct rain events, and you can see how the host plant, which is the green, has followed those rain events, but so did the larvae. And so we think what happened this year was that our little guys came out and then they went back in, and then they decided to come back out again because there was so much rain and so much host plant availability. And then in 2018, we released on a site that was a little bit more accessible to people. I love this area. I love this shot. Same thing. This is John Martin from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and Spring Strom from Wild Spring Ecology. So this is the way that we kind of secure them to shrubs so that they don't roll around like pool balls on a table, which is how John puts it. And we experienced some vandalism at this site. So we, you know, fairly rapidly had to kind of move those pods to other places, but not before the larvae started coming out. So, you know, I think there's something to be said for being in the right place at the right time. And Mike Reedy's one of the partners on this project and the Laguna Mountain Skipper. And he manages to get there when, you know, they're just getting out of the pod for the first time, or they're just leaving the pod for the first time. And I'm going to play this video for you. I kept the sound in. The video quality is terrible, but this is 2019, which was the Embarrassment of Riches season. This was a season, a lot of you will remember that we had painted ladies everywhere. It was the migration. It was stunning. There was rain. There were poppies. And this is what we call the reference site. So this is the site where we collect founders each year for the populations that we release in other areas. And it was pretty out of control. You can hear Spring say, "Oh, wow," at the beginning, because it was like, "Oh, wow." These are all Quino checkerspot males chasing each other. These pink flags in the habitat are pupae that we were able to see, which I'd never laid eyes on a Quino checkerspot pupa before. And it was pretty amazing because they look like that. This is a cool shot because you can see the pupa right here. This is the cast off over here on the right. This is the cast off larval shed. And then this is the plantago, the host plant, which is in bloom around this. So lest you think that the habitat's always brown and always dry, you know, we have proof that it's an amazing ecosystem that we live in San Diego County. Okay, so this is the 2020 COVID version, and these are not diaposing Quino checkerspot larvae. These are pre-diaposing.
Yes.
And the The reason that we release them as pre-diapause larvae is because we already had them in the lab at the time that the whole world shut down in March. And, you know, we had to make a lot of changes, just like everyone else had to kind of make a different plan for 2020. There was a lot of rain that year. It was a pretty long, wet spring, and there was a ton of host plant available, and we wanted them to have, you know, sort of all the resources that they would need. So we found a new release site, and we put them out as these teeny tiny third instar larvae. And we watched them grow into these giant fifth instar larvae. We observed them feeding on their alternate host plant, Castanea exerta, which is a paintbrush. And they went all the way to adults in this year. So that was really amazing to document this. And so obviously every year we've learned something new about Quino checkerspot butterflies, things that maybe people suspected happened, like the multiple year diapause, things that maybe like happened and somebody reported it, you know, many, many years ago, but not since, which is, you know, going all the way to adulthood in one fell swoop. We know that they really respond to their environment. And we know that, like, you know, if you're doing abundant surveys and you go and you don't see any Quino, it doesn't mean there's no Quino there. So it's been a very, you know, rewarding project, and just amazing partners contributing to this project. And so we've released over 13,000 so far. We have about 1,000 in the lab right now that we'll be releasing later this year. And that kind of brings me to, if we just talked about something that we feel like we know a little bit about, now we're going to talk about something that we don't know quite as much or at all. So this is the Laguna Mountain skipper butterfly. It is, you know, part of this project. We are kind of latecomers to this project in terms of the investment of the Forest Service and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and others on this partner list. This is Ken Osborne. He's worked with this butterfly for 20 years. He's a field biologist and, you know, helped inform the decision and the recovery plan for this species. So it's been a part of our landscape since 2019. We worked with the non-endangered nominate species, Purgus ruralis ruralis, in 2019. And, you know, it has the same story as Quino, listed in 1997. It was last seen in the Laguna Mountains in 1999. It's kind of a bummer because that's where it takes its name. And this map shows you, you know, here's Mount Laguna and here's Palomar Mountain. And this is, Palomar Mountain's the site of only the remaining, you know, 4 occurrences of this butterfly. It's all on private property. So they can't get there from here. This is more than 50 miles away. And so they need a little help. And so, you know, 2020 was going to be the year that we started this project. But of course, other things happened and we had to kick it over to this year. And even then, I think this is a pretty good metaphor for what happened. You know, you can just see Esther's mask back here. And this is one of the first females that we brought into the lab for this season of rearing. So they have a pretty cool life history as well. They have 2 adult flights. So they come out in spring. They diapause as pupae. So they all come out in spring. And then some of them will emerge again in the summer for a second summer flight, but all of them overwinter as pupae. And so this is a kind of a different strategy for maybe the front end of the season is the good end, but we should try something at the you know, tail end of it. So this is how we started the project at Palomar Mountain. So collecting the females, you can see they're tiny. Their entire wingspan is 1 inch. So this is an adult here. This is an adult here. And one of the questions we wanted to answer was, you know, is field oviposition, laying eggs, better for them, or is it better in the lab? And it turns out it's good either way. So we were able to answer that question. And it's different from Quino because they lay their eggs in a big clump, and they, you know, communally, you know, have a more of a communal lifestyle. But Laguna Mountain skipper has these teeny tiny eggs. The egg, we measured this. It fits not inside this O in the dollar, but inside the O of the god up there. So they're very small. The larvae that come out of this are even tinier than it seems, because this is the head capsule here in black starting to develop. And here's a larva that just hatched. So this photograph was taken with magnification under a microscope. You can't touch them. They're very fragile. And they make their own web shelters. You can see all this silk webbing. They created that. So they web up inside these silken and leaf tubes and feed inside those tubes. And they also, unlike Quino, they don't, I wouldn't say they don't get along, but they don't observe neighbor protocols, and so they need to be separated. And you know, that's kind of like this is pretty representative of like maybe once in a while we would get a peek of one of them, we could see them feeding, you know, but there were so many at the beginning that there just wasn't time to try to get everyone under the microscope. And you know, it was a very, I guess I would say flat out, we were running pretty hard to keep up with these guys. And this is just a fun behavioral bit, but this is the end of a Laguna Mountain skipper larva. And one of the things they do, because they live inside these shelters, they don't want to have their frass, which is insect poop. And you can see a piece of it over here. They don't want to have that inside. So they actually really forcefully flick it out. And it was funny because our our wildlife care specialists were like, they're flinging it at us. Like we had fun, like pretending like, you know, they did it on purpose and taking it personally. But it's really interesting to see it happen. Just want to put this out here. There were so many cups. We had to separate them and separate them again. We had 2.5 times more success than we expected to with larvae. And so we, you know, we really made the best of it. And I just need to say that we could easily open up a food truck because we have all these like food quality, you know, these are cupcake containers and these are deli cups, and we've got some boba straws later. But it was a lot. And so then we just had to figure out how to deal with these shelters, because they create the shelter, but because we had to be so conservative with our host plant to make sure we didn't run out of it, we would set them up with fresh host plant, and we would tie with those red threads the old shelter to it, so we didn't have to disturb the larva, and it could just go on to the adjacent sprig and do its thing. And we also gave them some alternate things like these boba straws. So we would cut them into small lengths and attach them with toothpicks. And then they had some penny rounds as well. And Esther even sewed them some little felt tubes here. And they used all of them. So it was good. And I just want to say, like, for tracking instars, so knowing how old these guys were, which was important because we were also trying to coordinate releases and figure out how we were going to do the releases. You can see their frass here at the bottom. And these are later stage larvae. So this is actually a pupa in here right now. But when they were tiny, what they had to do was examine all of the frass at the bottom and see if there were any head capsules in there. So when the larva molts to the next instar, they shed off that old head capsule and their old exoskeleton. And usually the exoskeleton would stay inside, but sometimes the head capsule would fall out. So if we found a head capsule, we would know, oh, they're in second instar or they're in third instar. So it was just this incredibly painstaking work to figure out what was going on inside these shelters. And here's one peeking out at us. This one has just made this is really tough silk. Like, it's this really incredibly tough silk. So this one's getting ready to pupate. And we did return most of the females that we got eggs from for this project back to Palomar. And then we also returned a subset of the larvae to the donor site. And so we would take them in their boba straw shelters and tuck them into a nice patch of Horcalia, their host plant. And during this time, we're also monitoring the second flight. So finding out when they stopped flying for the second time at Palomar is important just for the future, so that we can know if the butterflies on the lagunas are in sync with the butterflies in Mount Palomar. And these are the pupae. So the pupae, we first started getting them in early July. We've returned, a good portion of them to the Laguna Mountains recreation area. And now we're kind of troubleshooting the release method. And this is, I had a new employee say, this place looks like a lightsaber workshop, because we were making all the shelters. And Baby Yoda was our mascot during COVID. So this felt appropriate. But the release shelters have hardware cloth that is actually large enough for the butterfly to walk out of and fly away. So we would load up the pupae in here. Here's our partners from the Forest Service. This is Lauren Kwan and also Kirsten Winter, getting ready to release them on that first day. And so now we're figuring out how to deal with ants. Most people that know me know that I love ants, but just not in this context. And also the phenology, the timing of things. So these are the offspring of spring flight butterflies. So it stands to reason that some of them may think it'd be a good idea to come out for a summer flight on Mount Laguna. And sure enough, we got up there and it was actually happening while we were there. There was one that did emerge, crawled right out of the shelter, and it's this glorious, beautiful little butterfly. So there are Laguna Mountain skippers on Laguna Mountain right now. So it's all for them. So, getting kids this close, getting them to understand these animals, to want to be close to them is, the way that we get them to love them and then to grow up and fight for them. So I'm going to leave it with my son Rex looking at the 2019 Western monarch migration in Santa Cruz. And I just want to kind of say that I was there thinking there's so many fewer monarchs than the last time I had been there, and he was blown away. So we have to remind ourselves that there's still so much out there. There's so much beauty and so much to save. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paige. Yeah, I like that message of hope at the end, right? I mean, we're often bombarded with all of the bad news of things going on around us, but that's a wonderful message that there is so much left that needs our help and needs saving. Absolutely. And thank you for the work that you do in that, for helping these species to survive. I think we have a couple of questions in the chat. Someone wants to know if part of your outreach and education programs, do you provide resources about native plant gardening?
I believe so. That would be, it's funny. We actually have a monarch article coming out in California Garden in September. So yes, and some of that messaging, like we just had the Mayor's Monarch Pledge happen here, and that was in front of one of our it's been in development for a while, but is still under development, native gardens. We're definitely trying to talk about it a lot more. So, and we have a really amazing horticulturist here that's a native expert. And so she's been really integral to these discussions. So yeah.
Can you describe a little bit what the Mayor's Monarch Project is?
So it's a National Wildlife Federation program, and mayors have to pledge to help monarchs. And so essentially they have to choose 3 activities that they are going to commit to within their city to implement. And there's a whole list of, there's a menu of things that you can do. We actually had a lot of, so San Diego, and then we had Solana Beach this year, Escondido. I'm totally going to forget somebody, but there were several mayors that stepped up and said, we'll do that. So it's a great program.
That's awesome. And this is a good segue. Alex would like to know if you could spend a few minutes talking about monarchs. Alex, did you have anything in particular that you wanted Paige to address when it comes to the Western monarch population? We'll wait for Alex to type it up. You can also unmute Alex if you'd like to ask your question. in that regard? Paige, do you have anything off the top of your head that you'd like to chat about with the monarch population?
Well, there have been some interesting developments, which is, earlier in the summer, we were seeing Western monarchs in Oregon, like a lot earlier than normal, which was unexpected because the numbers were so low in 2020. So they're making their way, they're migrating. So that's hopeful, but I mean, it is pretty, as far as the migration goes, it's concerning, obviously. So we went from having, like, that picture I showed was, about 30,000 butterflies, not just in that picture, but the total Western monarch overwintering count was, close to that. It was about 28,000, I think, in 2019. And 30,000 is kind of estimated to be the, quasi-extinction threshold. So below that number, it's going to be hard for them to recover. And so going from that, and like I said, I was just like, wow, there's just so many fewer. And my son was like, wow, look how many there are, to the 2020 news that there were 2,000 counted, less than 2,000 was a lot. So I think it's not one thing, it's not two things, it's a very layered landscape of what's going on with monarchs. And we don't really know the causes, unfortunately. But we keep hitting at the things that we can, that's
all we can do, right?
That's what we can do. And people are stepping up. People are planting native milkweed like crazy, and it's great. And the San Diego Pollinator Alliance is doing a lot to try to increase availability of, like San Diego adapted seed. That's one of the issues. The sort of northern grown seed doesn't tend to do as well down here. And so, we're trying to, like, bring up that availability and seed bulk and try to make it more available for people, because tropical milkweed is not helping monarchs. So.
Right. And you bring up a really good point here, Paige. Do you know of, besides the San Diego Pollinator Alliance, which, if y'all are concerned about monarchs, I'd recommend you check them out. But are there any nurseries or any locations that you can think of where people could buy these native milkweeds, these San Diego adapted milkweeds, for their gardens and their yards?
Yes. So Native West is bringing up a lot of seed, or a lot of plants from seed, from STPA seed. They're primarily wholesale, but I think they do have public sales. And I think if you wanted to buy enough of it, you can make an order. In fact, I think if you want to kind of grab anything, you can email them and ask them. They have narrow leaf milkweed, and I think they are also bringing up some Ariocarpa, the woolly pod. And then it's Moosa Creek often has it. Those are the two that I always think of when I get that question. You can go to Walter Anderson, and Moosa Creek does have some there, but it's not as abundant. So people buy it pretty quick.
Excellent. Thank you for the tip there. Are there ways that people can get involved in conserving other butterfly species like the Quino checkerspot that you can think of that the community can help?
That's a hard question, because, like, all the Quino habitat is, in protected land. So I guess I would say this is one of those more global choices of, like, don't use pesticides. Like, if you want to help butterflies, don't use pesticides in your garden. Find another way. And it's a similar thing for Laguna Mountain skipper, where, because I often get asked, like, if I plant some plantago, and maybe if you live in Dictionary Hill, there used to be Quino, in Dictionary Hill. So, but it's a little bit, like I said, it's a little more of a challenge to have that sort of direct right now. But I expect that, someday in the very near future, we will have more of an opportunity to do that. And Sue just pointed out in the chat, and I cannot believe that I didn't think of Luca and Michaela Nursery in Encinitas, the butterfly farms. But yeah, that's another place to get native milkweed. They're part of the Pollinator Alliance. So
that's fantastic. Anyone else have any questions here for Paige before we get going? Again, sorry about the late start. So Paige, if you have just a couple extra minutes, maybe we could spend 1 or 2 more minutes answering some questions.
sure.
That'd be fantastic. I have a question for you. And my question is, what is your favorite insect? I bet it changes all the time. What is it right now?
I don't know. It's hard, but we have a lot of really cool insects here. I've always been sort of an ant and aquatic insect lover. So I also fly fish, so I have like a great appreciation for all the things coming together. You know, when I'm fishing, I'm like, oh, you know, you can see the caddisflies rolling around, you know, in the stream bottom and stuff like that. And I don't know. I can't do it, Sam. I can't.
Sorry, I lobbed you a hard ball here. Oh, there's some more great resources here in the chat from Native West here. It's talking about,
great.
you know, more about the availability of plants. So for these native plants for our native butterflies. Excellent. Thank you all for actually linking all of those resources there. That's really important. Paige, is there one thing you can think of besides, I mean, you named a couple already, but like one big takeaway that people can do to help conservation efforts for insects in particular?
I mean, I think being vocal about that it matters. I think that's one thing that escapes a lot of people is like they don't really have to interact with insects other than in ways of like, I want to get rid of the fleas on my dog and I want to get rid of these Argentine ants in my kitchen and I'm sick of these aphids on my plants, you know, but like it's the relationship needs work because, you know, it's people don't understand the role. I think now they understand more than they used to, the role of pollinators, you know, and how just critical that is to you know, food. And if you don't care about food, coffee, you know, or right. But kind of standing up for, you know, the roles of insects and what they do, just thinking about decomposers. Like I can't think of anybody that's like, I love cockroaches, you know, but the things that cockroaches do to help sort of process waste in our environment, or, you know, millipedes, or, you know, and there's all these other like soil dwelling invertebrates that do all this like heavy lifting. And people don't know about it because they don't have to think about it. And so I would say, like, if there's an opportunity to support something like that, and just something that comes to mind is this you know, legislation for Western monarchs. So if there's some kind of opportunity to kind of throw your hat in and say, I don't, you know, I want to support, I want my legislature to support this. I want to have, you know, the ability for these insects to receive this support. I think that's kind of a global overlay of things that people can do. And then really honestly, like people kind of committing to not using insecticides in their garden. I think, you know, these neonicotinoid pesticides that are used, there's a huge problem of like getting the dosage, getting the mixture right. And sometimes people are like, you know, more is better. And there's a lot of runoff and it's persistent in the soil for a really long time. It's a water contaminant. And so if you got everyone, you know, to say, you know what, I'm not going to get that stuff. I'm not going to use imidacloprid. I'm not going to use neonicotinoid pesticides. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to pinch those aphids or whatever, you know. I think that would be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. The ripple effect starts with one person and then ripples out, right? And I love how you touched on how people's voices are more powerful than they think, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think this is a great note to end things on, hopefully with a little bit of hope here for these really, really important animals to our ecosystem, our environment, and our food sources, as you were saying. And Paige, I want to thank you so much for coming tonight and for speaking. and for your patience. And I can't wait to see this new exhibit. I don't know about y'all, but I want to go into that spider room.
It's pretty awesome. It's
Yeah.
coming together. I mean, I wish I had more to share, but it's going to be pretty great. So,
We'll just have to see it in person soon.
yeah.
All right, that's going to be it for us tonight, folks. Thank you so much for joining us. And thanks again to Paige and to CNMF for your sponsorship for tonight. And I hope you have a wonderful evening. Bye, everyone.
Everyone.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.